Nice. Well, welcome, Conan. I just wanted to probably say thanks for coming along on short notice today when I'm down in Christchurch catching up with people. And the big thing I'm trying to do is get more voices from the agricultural sort of community and ideally younger people, because this gene tech bill, if released, it's going to affect generations beyond us, and there's no going back since then. But I guess where I first encountered you was actually on LinkedIn, which is where I live because I'm a recruiter. So I'm on there probably too much. But it was actually nice to see someone put it out there on LinkedIn. It looked like you had quite a bit of engagement on that. So I was just curious, like, what prompted you to do that in the first place and put that message out there?
Well, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to come and have a chat about this, because I think the reason why I put it out there is because we aren't talking about it enough openly in the agricultural industry. And that's why you saw good engagement. Interesting to see some people who are general managers of industry bodies had put some comments on it and they were deleted within a couple of hours. Maybe because they didn't align with what their farmers might be saying, or someone else told them to pull their head in because it was their own personal thing. So it's just a conversation that we need to have more broadly and openly, because most people don't really understand the implications of what the current bill does or what the current regulations are before this bill. There is not a ban currently, is the main thing.
Yeah, well, that's what everyone's being fed, isn't it? There's a ban in place, but gene tech there's still research happening here for the last few decades. So it's not like people are not doing research. It's just that it gets a bit messy when it starts getting in food systems and agriculture, and I think that's probably what most people are against. Because I can see the support around like medical uses, particularly with like insulin and things like that. When you start getting into mRNA, maybe vaccines, that's a little bit different of a debate, but that's separate to this. Sorry, before I ramble on about other things, could you just explain a little bit about your business and like what you do and how you got into everything you're doing?
Okay, well, my name's Conan Moynihan. I am a farm consultant, independent here in Canterbury. My company is called Force of Nature Consulting. I also do independent agronomy through a company called Agribusiness here. So I've been running my own company for just over 2 years now. Prior to that, I was working for one of the biggest irrigation schemes in Canterbury here. And before that, environmental engineer, so working contaminated land, hazardous materials. So a bit of a background on that. Prior to that, I was running my parents' sheep and beef farm in Cave in South Canterbury, which was a great experience, but just through succession and that farm just wouldn't have been able to support me and my family through that. So I made the decision to go away and try and make my own money to get there. Haven't achieved that yet, but we're on the way. But yeah, I'm very passionate about profitable and resilient farm systems and food systems, the way in which our soil health links to our human health and cognitive function. It's all interlinked. And mainly the biggest passion for me right now is the huge opportunity in front of New Zealand farmers if we are to go down the nutrient density or even try to be the first regenerative agricultural nation and lead the world in more safe and healthier food systems as well, in the way in which we produce things.
So you had it in the family. Your family was in farming, you're in farming.
Yeah. So the Moynihan clan have always been farmers since we got here from Ireland, one of the first boats, and we've kind of just slowly moved up from Dunedin to Canterbury. And yeah, it's very, very well, pretty much everyone in my family is working in agriculture, except my mum's a teacher, which is pretty classic for a farmer's wife. And yeah, I went out of the agricultural industry for a bit, but I just had the itch to get back. And yeah, I feel very blessed to be able to work with farmers and get out of my own office and see the natural landscapes and work with some really cool people. It's an exciting industry. There's a lot going on, particularly around regulation, but also opportunities and technology that's being developed.
So when you're consulting to farmers, are you getting an opportunity to like raise this gene technology bill with them? What's the kind of sense of their awareness, if you had any of those conversations?
To be fair, I haven't had too many conversations directly with farmers and the ones that I consult to. I generally work with quite conventional, what you'd call conventional or traditional farmers, who might be a little bit curious about going away from the advice that's sold with products. They want to get some independency out there. So for me, I don't have a huge amount, but if I go into, say, like a regen space, there seems to be more awareness around it there because they can see what this is going to do.
Yeah. So, okay, interesting. So with those farmers that are on the conventional treadmill or whatever, what's their reasons for trying to get away? Is there anything kind of common that
dissatisfaction with the level of advice or the amount of times their advisors change in a short period of time, so they don't really know their farm, kind of just slapping the same old recipe over and over, or they're seeing issues with their farm where their costs are going up but they're not producing more and getting more profitability, or they're seeing things like animal health is a massive one, particularly in dairy. That seems to be, they try everything else and then they come back to the soil and their fertilizer program and start working from there. So for those guys, it's more the dissatisfaction with the current status quo, which is, in my opinion, is absolutely fair. They're leading them down a track that just is going to cost them more and more, and our farmers are being farmed by the industry. Yeah. Yeah, so it generally starts with fertilizer and then seed companies or changing their seed, or then it will slowly, eventually, as they get more comfortable, end up in the farm system change.
Okay, I've just noticed your mic is slightly in front of your face. Can I? Yeah. And yeah, just if you could get it in front of you, don't worry, I can edit all this. Probably up closer is more important.
Up closer, yeah.
But if you can...
Down there.
Get it. Sure. Hold that a sec, mate.
I'll hold that
one up.
There we go. Shit.
It's a Timu one, mate. It's not.
Mate, I've got a Timu one as well, and they actually go pretty good.
You got it for me.
I'll hold the top. This is good for the podcast.
Yeah. Cool.
I've grazed my nose this morning at the gym, so hopefully they can't see that.
Yeah, so is it a bit of an enlightening process sometimes then? Farmers, like, there's a lot of blind spots with this sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think once they see one part of their system, there's a light there or a different way of doing things that can create that, almost that paradigm shift in mindset where you can start seeing or being a bit more curious about, well, actually, if I can change this part of my system, what other opportunities are out there within my farm system or the way I do things. So it's almost like you're cracking open a little crack in their brain, and then they start seeing the opportunities that are outside what they're currently doing. Yeah.
So I want to go back to that point you made about like nutrient density as well, and that kind of relationship between soil health and nutrient density in plants. So could you elaborate on maybe some of that?
Yeah, so this thing is something that I'm super excited about, is that the way in which we grow our food directly links to the quality of our food and the nutrient quality or richness within that. The crazy thing that most people don't realise is probably since the Second World War, we've lost at least 30% of our nutrient quality within our food. So while you may think you're eating healthy, like fruit and vegetables and meat and dairy, it's actually got lower nutrient quality or richness within it, or the diversity within those nutrients within that are a lot lower than they used to be. And that is kind of coinciding with more processed food and just us being deficient, essentially, as human beings. So that's why we're seeing an increase in a lot of health issues. But also that quality of food and the diversity of microbes in that soil flows through to our stomachs, and then that flows through to our brain. So our stomach is our second brain. So there's a lot of cognitive function that is related to the way in which we grow our food. So if you look at the world right now, there's 1 in 5 people have a diagnosed mental health issue. That's huge. Like, it never used to be like that, and it's part and parcel to the environment that we live within, but also the food in which we're eating.
When I understood this as myself as well, like the soil has its own biome,
yeah,
and that is directly linked to the biome of your own gut,
yeah,
which links to your brain, right?
Almost like a perfect mirror. But at the moment, most of our guts are only operating at 10% of that biome that it should be.
Is that right?
Yeah, which I only found out in the last month or two. So I'm like, well, that's probably a lot of the reason why we do see the mental health and the issues around our growing health issues as a society. Somewhat concerning, but also probably the biggest concern is that our health system and our food system are two separate conversations, and actually maybe going forward we need to have them as one.
Yeah, and you chuck a bit of glyphosate in there, and we all know what that does to your gut as well.
Yeah, well, you got two sides of this coin there where people say it doesn't do anything and they're very loud about that. And then you got the growing research body that is showing that it's pretty bad. And like, if you ask anyone, would you be comfortable with chemicals being sprayed on your food? They're all going to say no, but it's just that it's so far away from where they're eating it. They don't actually understand the process. And the amazing thing is that if you actually have a really active soil microbiome and you've got all the diversity in the soil, it can break down that glyphosate with straight away. Like, you won't get the residue. But most of our soils are degraded across the world, including New Zealand, because we don't have that biodiversity. So you can earn the right to use it in special cases, but most farm systems aren't anywhere near that.
So I didn't know that. So I thought glyphosate was kind of like a bit of a forever chemical.
It is, because we don't have the biodiversity in our soil to break it down. So it's our soils, when they're actually highly functioning and really healthy, can actually detoxify things that are in the soil. So if you've got heavy metals, all that sort of stuff, things like glyphosate, it can break it down really quickly. Or it will store it in the soil, but in a form that can't be taken up in the plant. So basically protecting us from it. So that's an exciting opportunity, but most of our agricultural soils are nowhere near that. So that's why we get the leaching. That's why we get it taken up in the plant. So there's a few issues there.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed. I want to go back to the gene tech bill because that's why we're talking, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that concern you the most about it, mate?
Well, if we take it to the nutrient density side of thing, the GMO crops that are already out there do not form natural relationships with a lot of the crucial soil microbiology in our soil. So that means we don't get the same nutrient quality within those crops that are growing. Also, the fact that we've been doing gene tech as a world, if we look at it globally, for at least 30 years, we've got 3 crops and none of them are doing that well. And I think it's only 15% of the US actually use this 3 crops. And some studies are showing that while they're supposed to use less pesticides and have less insect pressure, there's up to 200 times the pressure of what there would be for a conventionally grown crop. So it's not delivering what they're saying it is. My other concerns are like the patent ability of seeds. Like farmers are going to lose that, I guess, freedom. And that also comes at a cost. So it's another thing that they'll be farmed for. It's just like the nutrient quality side of it just doesn't make sense to me. There's all the upsides that are being talked about. I'm not really sure what the issue is we're trying to solve that can't be solved with proper farm management and hasn't already been created. This is just the latest silver bullet for the silver bullets that we've already created, and all these issues that we're having can be solved by proper farm management, and a lot of it can be solved by just improving our soil health and function and growing healthy farm systems, which are also more profitable than some of the ones we're running now. But that's not a conversation that we're having, because that puts the power back in the farmers' hands. It also means that a lot of the people that rely on those farmers for income will not be needed, but it just means the whole system has to change in how they support and advise farmers. So for me, that's the big concern, is that it's just us losing more control of our food system. And for people who aren't in the farming industry, you can't control what is going to be put on your food. They've already changed the labelling about GMOs and gene editing for New Zealand and Australia, so you don't have to put it on the label, which is madness. And if I was in an organic producer, which brings in over $1 billion every year for New Zealand, and we can't even meet the world demand for organic, so that's a huge opportunity in itself. These guys have to do extra proving now to say that they're not going to have GMOs. So I don't get what we're trying to achieve here, other than quick bucks for generally overseas owned companies. And even our scientists here that are saying like it's the next thing. It's like, well, you've had 30 years of doing it in a lab and you haven't come up with anything that's you can prove is safe once it gets out into the environment. Maybe you just need to keep trying. The bar's there and it's pretty safe.
Do farmers actually like save seeds? Do you know?
Not all of them, yeah. But that pretty much means if we go to this GE or GMO, you can't save seeds because it's patented.
Yeah,
so you lose that ability. So some farmers will save seed and sell it, but most of it's like the cropping industry is incredibly hard. It's probably one of the hardest ones in New Zealand. It's at the bottom of the cycle at the moment. They very much get used as a bank for the seed companies, so they don't get paid for 2 years till after the crop, which is, in my mind, is just insane. Why would you work with those people? And then just the fluctuations in climate and the quality that you've got to meet, and just the amount of inputs you got to do, and you just don't know what that season's going to bring. Like, it's so tough out there for those guys, but there's also such an opportunity because good quality grain and wheat and all this is just increasingly being sought after.
There's a few things just on that like concerns point with that bill. Yeah, a few good points there. But like the economic angle is a big one for New Zealand because the primary export sector here is quite it's foundational of the economy. So to lean into GMOs and gene editing or whatever, when the world finds out that New Zealand has done that, because I think maybe Kiwis are a little bit, maybe they don't think there is such a premium on products overseas, and maybe you could talk about that. But when the world does realise That just seems like a massive risk on the economy, because the world's going to be like, well, New Zealand's GMO now. So where's that? They haven't got that competitive advantage anymore. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, this is my biggest thought about it, because I'm no expert on this topic. But if I'm a marketer for New Zealand produce, we are one of like a handful of countries in the world that do not have any GMOs in our systems. So that is a massive marketing opportunity that is right in front of us that we're not seeking. By letting this into our systems, we can't do that anymore. So we're just the same as everyone else in the commodity market. I don't know why anyone would think that's a good idea. It's time to sell to the premium markets. We, as a country, can feed 40 million people, but what 40 million people of the world do we want to focus on? And this is where the nutrient density, our climate is really favourable in the way in our farm systems already sets us up for this. With a few tweaks, we can actually really capture that high echelon of the 40 million in the world who are happy to pay extra for it, because the consumer is becoming more health conscious about what is in their food. There's, even in America, they're pulling away from non-GMO. They've got the non-GMO project, which is a stamp that goes on food there. Like, EU is not a big fan of it. The Japanese consumer brand have already come out and said, we do not want New Zealand food if you go down this path. All the signs are already there, but whoever is doing a trade is very quiet on it. And I am not sure why people think it's not an opportunity, but it's actually a huge risk in terms of just economics for New Zealand. It could be economic suicide for our agricultural industry. Like, we just play in the commodity games, which with our style of farming, we can't compete with some of those third world countries that are producing similar things to us.
I'm amazed how we get here. I'm amazed how based on all the evidence and everything that you can learn from overseas, like you said earlier, 30 years of evidence of how GMOs have played out, and most of those have ended up in commodity markets. So all of the main GMOs, like GMO maize, canola, cotton, but they end up in animal feed, or they end up in ethanol for fuel cars. So it's not like there's some super high tech innovation that like improves the nutrient quality or improves environmental outcomes. I'm sure there's probably a bit of propaganda around that. But
well, the thing is, a lot of the way that they say, or what this is touted is, we've got to feed the world. But a lot of that food is not going to humans. And the other thing is, when they say it's more climate and crop resilient, there's been a GMO crop that's been sold into Africa that was said to be drought resilient, and it wasn't, and they sued the company for it and won. So all these things where they say it's going to do X, Y, Z can actually be done better with our current breeding systems in New Zealand, which are really good and world leading, and also just better farm system management. We can actually look at some of probably our older seed breeds. They probably will solve all the issues that we're having. And if we're talking about climate stuff in terms of agriculture, like how do we drop our methane from our animals? The easiest way you can do that is feed a better mixed ration within a cow, and it drops the nitrogen leaching in the pee and the poo. It also drops the methane that the cow belches, all from just better feeding, which means the cow or the sheep will grow faster, produce more milk, means more profit. Simple as that. But that's not what we're doing. We're looking for the tech innovation first, rather than just trying to fix our farm systems with the knowledge that we've had for 60, 70 years.
I think when farmers maybe realise that, this is about commercial property rights of plants, and even farmers who don't want to farm with that, once GMOs are released, I mean, again, US is a prime example, but there's been organic farms, people that are not wanting to use GMO seeds or plants, and they're getting contaminated once those GMOs are obviously cross-pollinating, because that's what nature does. They're now liable to pay the IP holders of. Do you think, do farmers really understand? Do they get that here?
That conversation has not been had. That's why I think this needs to be a broader conversation, because there are examples of this where people who don't want to use it, because a lot of farmers just say, I'm not going to use it, so I'll be sweet. But the way and how efficient GMOs and gene editing is now, and the way in which we're going to relax these rules, will mean that we'll get cross-contamination. And that is when the patent holder can come and turn up and go, well, you're growing my stuff and I didn't give it to you, so you need to pay me now. And then that's another hit to the farmer. So there is so much nuance within this topic that the way in which we're rushing it through, and the fact that it's packaged up with like health, that doesn't make sense. Let's keep them separate. But there's just so much nuance, and we need to have a good, honest conversation about the pros and the cons from both sides. And even if you look at farming media, there's just not enough of the conversation. There's a lot of pro stuff. There's the odd bit of the con, but it should be like every week in the newspaper, there should be something talking about this. There should be people talking about it on the radio and talking about it at conferences. But it's still kind of like, we know it's going on, but we don't really want to talk about it because it's such a big topic and it's hard. And we'll deal with it once the bill comes out.
Well, I guess farmers as well, busy, eh?
They're
out, like they're working. They don't got the time to sit there and understand what this all means for them. Or they might log on to watch the mainstream news and get their information that way, and not really had in my view, not had the fair hearing yet. There's been a few reports, but it needs to get out there. And I agree with you. It needs to be far more of a robust public discourse on this, because it's wide ranging. It affects everyone. You all eat food, it will affect you.
Yeah, and to be fair, in New Zealand, we're already eating food that's come from overseas. It's got GMOs within it. We just don't really know it. But for farmers, it's. I just feel we're not having an open conversation about such big topics like this, and they are so busy at the moment. And it has been really hard up until probably the last 12 months for most farms, excluding probably vineyards and cropping farmers. So they're just trying to survive essentially. So why would they care about this? But also people are using that bottom of the cycle as a way to say, well, actually, if we go down the GMO cropping seeds, you'll, be more profitable as a farmer. So using kind of the situation our farmers are in against them to use the emotive thing to try and get the support. But just if we go back to like, there's no economics or trade analysis done of this before they've even rushed it out. That should have been the first step, and that should be just the one thing that farmers should take away is, if there's no trade or economic analysis of how this is going to impact our industry or our country, why are we doing it, or why are we progressing this until we actually have that?
I think that OAN's did an independent economic analysis of the regulatory costs, which were up to 20 billion in lost exports, and the government is saying this is going to make us rich. Chris Luxon has said that, GE is going to make us rich. Obviously, a lot of people are in his ear. Politicians are not scientists.
No. And the advisors to them are only as good as the advisor they choose, and whoever's telling them what they should believe as well. I feel Owens have done some really good work on this, but there's this really annoying thing within farming where we get really dogmatic about what type of farm I am. I'm conventional, traditional, biodynamic, organic, regen, and we just ignore stuff that's outside that, even though it could be really beneficial to us to even just take the good things. So if they see OANS has done it, Organic New Zealand, they'll be like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. That's just those organic people trying to preserve their trade. It's almost like a tribal mentality. And I'm like, well, no, they're actually doing some really good work around this that will benefit you, even if you don't want to be organic. That's also a limiting factor. And we've just got so much information coming into us at all times through social media, all forms of news. So how is a farmer supposed to figure out what is the right thing? Like, it's confusing for me at times. I'm like, is this good? Is this bad? How do I know? I don't know. I've been exposed to a lot of farmers from around the world in the last 12 months and been to the US a couple of times, and there's a pull away from GMOs and gene editing, and it's not delivering what they're saying. So are we the last frontier for those companies to make money before it goes bust? That's a question we should also wonder as well.
In my view, I think we stand far more to lose than we stand to gain on this issue. And you only need to look overseas to see how it's already played out. It's not rocket science. Right?
Yeah, we can learn from other countries. Like, it's not so different from us. It's kind of a path of what will happen to us. And that's my frustration is there's always a year but where I can't hear in farming, or that doesn't apply because it's done in another country. But you can take the fundamentals of that and then apply a New Zealand lens to it, and you'll find that it does work. And yeah, just look at 30 or 40 years and no significant breakthroughs. Do we think our scientists are going to be better than that? Well, they've already been working on it that whole time anyway, and they haven't been able to meet the current regulations. And if they could meet the current regulations, we'd be using it. And then the novelty products that they have come up with, which might be just a purple apple or something like that, no one's interested in it, so they haven't pushed it. I scratch my head at why we think this is going to be our opportunity. And maybe it's they think we can build some big tech companies as a New Zealander and then sell it to the rest of the world. But what's stopping us from doing that currently? Because we can build it in a lab here and go to the US and trial it if we actually really want.
Are you too familiar with like gene editing versus like the traditional GMOs?
No. Yeah, I'm definitely not
right.
down on the nuance. It's something I need to get a bit more on. I'm at the high level and I just see it from like, what's the biggest opportunity for agricultural nation, prosperity. We want to double production. It's not physically possible, but we could double profit quite easily if we play to the right 40 million in the world, and that's around nutrient density, non-GMO. Could even be the first regenerative nation if we wanted to, which would see a pushback to rural communities, and those smaller farms will actually be more profitable. So the opportunity is so massive. And I can see it, but it feels like a lot of our industry can't see that, and could happily trade this off for some technology, and by the looks of it.
Well, when I look at it, it's a Band-Aid. You're putting a Band-Aid over things. You know, the premise is, oh, this is going to save climate change. Oh, we can grow faster. We can make new varieties quicker. And that's, sure, it sounds great, but you're forgetting about all these natural solutions that don't require patents and are cheaper.
And generally linked to your farm profitability, like building more carbon in your soils will actually make you more resilient, hold more water, hold on in a drought, put more water in the soil before it floods, just improve the quality of your crops or animals, because you'll be able to grow more with less inputs, which is all profit for a farmer. But we're not touting that. And there's just evidence all around the world of people doing it and making more money and improving their systems, improving the environment, improving their waterways around them, and producing better quality food. But why aren't we pushing that? We've got some fantastic work happening here in the functional diversity space with Pablo Gregorini at Lincoln University. That is the opportunity for our red meat and dairy industry. But most of them just can't see how it's going to translate from that to the farm. And I'm like, well, let's start doing it on some farms, just in small portions, to see how it works, and then figure it out. Where's the number 8 wide mentality gone?
What is the main thing, I guess, when you're trying to advise? Is there like a common misconception that comes up for farmers, and like why they might be adverse to switching to a different system that you might be proposing on a regenerative?
I would say it's risk profile.
What do you mean by that?
So if I use this chemical or I use this amount of fertilizer, I should be able to grow this amount of crop, which means or produce this amount of grass to milk a cow off or finish my lambs. So it's basically like they're worried about the risk. They're basically de-risking their income, and that is probably the biggest one. But if they can create a functional system, it actually takes a lot of that risk out for them. And when things do go wrong in terms of climate, say a drought or a flood, they'll bounce back quicker. And there's just this massive thing that I need XYZ to be able to make XYZ. I had a conversation last week with a farmer at a field day, and he basically said nitrogen is key to his profitability. He's not a big nitrogen user, but he couldn't figure out that you can get natural nitrogen from the atmosphere, which is floating around at 78% of what we're breathing right now through legumes. It has to come out of a bag, and all the other stuff is just nice to have. He's got some issues in his soils there, so his input cost is only going to go up in terms of irrigation and nitrogen. But he has been convinced through the current science that that is the only way to be a profitable farmer. So what we need is to take all the case studies from around New Zealand and actually create regional databases of guys that are doing some really cool stuff, that have resilient farm systems, that are really profitable, that have low input or low to medium inputs, but are creating systems that are really profitable and can show that there is actually less risk in going this way. It's actually better. And that will also help our banks as well, because banks are aware that this is a thing, but they need the data to back it up. So if someone can create that data and show that it does work, then those people would get actually lower mortgage rates when it comes to the bank. That's where the banks are heading. They know this is a thing. They just need the data. And they need to de-risk their lending profile. And if they can get farmers that can show that they've got lower impacts on the environment, lower climate impacts, they're going to get maybe 1% off their loan, which is massive when you're talking about millions of dollars a year, so sort of thing. So it's risk and education. And you've got an industry that is largely all our advice comes from someone selling you something, which overseas is a very uncommon thing. And it's one of the first things that people will notice from another agricultural nation coming here, is that all our advice as farmers is coming from someone who's selling you a product, which inherently means they're going to recommend their products, even if it's not the best one for you. So that's where I guess those people dabbling into the curiosity of independence will start realizing that there's actually a whole world of products, and no two products are similar, but one might be a lot better in terms of efficacy.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance on it, but yeah, it's just like risk is the biggest thing, and you're playing with a climate that is up and down and increasingly more so. The people are just trying to play it safe and make sure that they keep the farm, and that is a big driver. So if we can educate people and show them that there is data out there showing that going with a lower impact from environment and animal health and all that, and improving their natural capital within their farms, then that will start the shift.
On that note, like with the people collecting data, is there anyone that's kind of spearheading that now? Any prominent people?
Probably, well, personally, I'm about to start doing some work on this with an opportunity that's just come up for me. And that's one of it, is building that database, but also building a assessment tool for farmers to use to plug in their own data and see what their opportunities are in terms of what practices they can change to essentially have those outcomes. Or if I go from my current system to a steady state, fully fledged low input system that is regenerating on itself, what does that look like from a profitability point of view and all things like that? That's what we're missing, and that's something I'm quite excited about. I'm not like super nerdy on the numbers thing, but I just see a massive opportunity there, and I'm good enough with an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm sure AI will help me. It's like because that'll be a key part of it as well. Is like, how does it keep learning? And then if you get more and more people putting their data in over time, as long as the farmer is open to selling that data, because it's their data originally, that will help it learn as well over time. And then hopefully you'll be able to pull that down to a regional level. What happens in a drought versus a flood year? How does these farms compare financially when it's a tough year?
That sounds pretty cool, man. So good luck with that.
Yeah, it's a big job. I'm excited about it, but I think we're at that point now where we're having a lot of conversations and there's data out there, and I've seen it, and I'm like, it's pretty hard to argue with that.
Yeah.
And just to be able to show that, because farmers will always be skeptical that it doesn't apply to them, it's like, well, let's put your data into this system and make a few tweaks to it and see what it does. And then you can decide whether those numbers stack up, or start thinking about it and create that curiosity for change.
If you had like, I guess, one bit of advice for farmers on this gene tech bill, what would you want to say to people, do you think?
I would get curious about what it means for you and your opportunities going forward, and what are the people telling you that it's going to solve? What issue do you have that is actually going to solve for you, or is it going to solve for us as an industry that can't be solved through things that we've already done? We're one of the leaders in terms of agricultural science, and we've got a huge amount of data, and some of that older data from pre-1980s still very applicable to profitable farm systems now. So just the curiosity about it, and just have some open conversations and talk to your industry bodies about it as well, and get their positions, because a lot of them are quite quiet on this as well, which means they're probably somewhat supporting it or just hoping to not get caught on the crossfire. But you will find that the people that do know about this in the general public are not happy.
I think the speed that this bill has been thrown on, and I think the timing is very curious, like when they slipped it through at Christmas.
Yeah. Well, you'd see anything with big farming regulation, it gets slipped through close to Christmas, and you get about 6 weeks to respond to it. So it's almost like they set a lot of these things up so that you get minimal input from the community. And I've seen it year after year in terms of, I've been back in the environmental space for in farming for 6 years now, and it's this regular thing. We've got this massive piece of legislation coming through, we'll give you 6 weeks at the time you're the most busy. So you can't actually put anything into it to go against it. So then everyone just relies on their industry to hopefully say what they want to say. But then farmers also need to communicate how they feel to their industry bodies, because largely they just take a position that may not actually reflect what the whole industry body wants.
Yeah, I think arms have been kind of forced, hands should I say, have been forced, particularly like Fonterra, who we've been kind of pressuring quite a bit. Because it looks to me like primary industry, has kind of like, the government has strong armed them and said, this is happening. So everyone's just trying to put guardrails around it.
Yeah, I'd
That's
agree
my
with
sense.
that. Yeah.
Rather than saying, hang on a sec, they're just going along with it and trying to amend. But I just don't, as we know, there's no going back once you do that.
Yeah, once you open this can of worms, you can't put it back. And I think people think, well, once that crop's done, it's done. And I'm like, that's not how it works. Once it's in this island, we will not get it back. And even if we only did it in the North Island, it would still make it to the South Island, or someone would smuggle it in, because we're inherently Kiwis and we just like to go against authority at times. But things like this, we just kind of stand back and let it happen. And this for me, this could be like our nuclear moment in terms of agriculture, which is a big thing to say, but we can't go back once we do this. And I don't want to play in the commodity market. If I was a farmer, I want to make as much money for the high quality thing that I'm producing. I don't want to play with India if I'm making milk. Their herd's just getting bigger and bigger. We need to sell to that high value market. And we can't even if our whole dairy herd went to organics, we couldn't supply the world's demand for it. And they get paid more per milk solid than conventional. So it's probably a pretty big driver there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I was keen to ask you about, I don't know if you've seen much of the submissions, because I've probably watched too many of them. But the interesting one I watched was of Zespri.
Okay.
Yeah, I encourage you to watch it as well, because they basically make the admission that, like, one of the head honchos in the oral submission said that they want to try gene editing because they feel gene editing is just kind of a natural extension of nature. That is
that's what the number one thing in agriculture is. We're just speeding up nature's progress. But I'm like, nature's a better version of this, and it creates that more resilient plant, because we actually do need the microbiology to talk to our plants in the first place. And that's the part that gets missed, because soil biology and its function, like, we know more about what happens in the ocean than what happens in our soil. There's like 40 million microbes in a teaspoon of soil. How do we know all these relationships and how beneficial they are? But we just kind of think of it as dirt, but it's actually a living and breathing ecosystem. And now that we're seeing nutritionists and that pick up, it's linked to basically our gut health and our brain health. There should be more of a push, but in agriculture, it's like, nah, it's just, we're speeding up what we're already doing, which we've been largely trying to do behind doors in labs anyway. And to be fair, some of their plant breeding currently isn't that good. Like, if you look at ryegrass, it doesn't really persist more than a couple of years, which is it's a great model for the seed companies, but it's not great for the farmers. And that quality of ryegrass is not what it used to be. So people are using, we'll get better, more resilient ryegrass out of that. I'm like, no, we won't. We'll probably get worse.
Yeah, I want to touch on that actually, because that's a really big thing, because you've got ag research who've got their genetically engineered ryegrass. I'm not too sure if you're familiar with that.
I've heard about it, and my brain just switches off now, because I'm like, I know what the thing they're going to say is. It's that whole thing is like, we're just speeding up our plant breeding. I'm like, well, what's stopped you so far from being able to get it out into the environment?
Obviously, we know once it's released, especially grasses,
Yeah,
will go everywhere.
Yeah.
What does that mean for organic grass-fed beef, meat, whatever, that are not wanting to use that grass, because it's going to go there eventually. So, and as we talked about earlier, the labeling of it is curious, the timing of the labeling going away.
Yeah, and then they've just come up with this grass-fed beef standard for New Zealand as well. But that doesn't say anything about being non-GMO.
Non-GMO, yeah.
The opportunity is around organic, non-GMO, grass-fed livestock. That is the opportunity. And it's also where the functional diversity in that system flows through to the nutrient quality of that food. And it's only a matter of time before we start seeing that on basically the food we are selling. And there's already people working on how do we make our camera and our iPhone. So when you go to the supermarket, you can shine the light on a piece of fruit or meat, and it'll tell you how nutrient dense that is. then the consumer will just pick based on that.
Oh, is it a spectrometer? Is that what they
Yeah,
call
it's
it?
almost like a spectrometer sort of thing.
Sorry, you go.
Oh, that's probably my level of knowledge of it. It shines light on it. It's basically what we can use to see what planets are made of in different galaxies. Same sort of thing. You're sending light and it reflects back. But it's the guy who's developing it wants it to be eventually on like when your iPhone and your Samsung. So when you're at the supermarket, you can just do it yourself and you can choose that carrot over the other carrot. And then that will drive consumer buying quite quickly. But also if you take away the ability for our basically soil biology to talk to our food in terms of the way in which it's grown, then that nutrient quality is going to be crap regardless. So
what is that? Is that a certain guy or is it a company?
yeah, it's called the Bionutrient Food Association in the US, and the main guy there is Dan Kittredge, who is kind of the one who coined the term nutrient density originally, but that's his big goal, is to do that. And he's done the nutrient density studies, basically figuring out what low nutrient density in specific crops versus high density is. So what is the spectrum? How do we know where we are on the spectrum if we don't have a spectrum? And if you look at like grapes, there's the lowest grape, you would have to eat 15 times the amount of the top grape to get the same amount of nutrient quality. So that's 15 grapes versus one. That also means you have to eat more calories. So that's probably why we see more obesity now, is because we have to eat more calories to get more satiated in terms of minerals. But he's doing it for beef at the moment, so pretty interesting. And then correlating it back to the farm systems and how it was grown as well, which is pretty cool. So comparing conventional, organic, regen, to figure out what actually does influence it.
That gives a lot of power back to a consumer, right? Because they're obviously taking the right to choose away with the labelling. In New Zealand, if most people don't know, they've just passed the FSANZ bill, which basically means that genetically modified organisms or gene-edited organisms no longer need to be labelled. And there's obviously a hot debate around that because we import a lot of it anyway. But yeah, that's a big fundamental shift. And that gives a lot of power back. So I'm all for that. All for that. I'm just on the politicians, I guess, because they're the one that written this, helped write this for industry. Your thoughts on why they've gone for this?
There's this whole thing around doubling production because we need to get more money into this country from exports so that we can pay off all the debt we've got and continue to thrive as a first world country. Otherwise, we do very quickly risk going back to third world because New Zealand's actually on a teetering point. We lack a real vision as a country, I feel, and as an agricultural industry. So what are we working towards? And it just seems like we're just trying to get as much money in through the door. So I think from that point of view, tech seems to be so sexy. And if we look at what Ireland's done, they've managed to entice a whole lot of tech companies to come there and basically change their landscape as a country in terms of import and export money. Whereas here is agriculture is our big opportunity. And you just have to look at companies like Halter who are doing super well in terms of industry growth. So they're just basically looking for the next couple of companies that'll do that. And they think gene tech's probably one of those. Or somehow miraculously allow us to do the most yield and improve our systems in that way. None of these. New Zealand, in terms of natural breeding of plants, is already like world leading in terms of the yields we're getting. So gene tech's not going to give us any advantage. Maybe if we were somewhere else in the world, but our climate here just allows us, and our just natural ability in the way in which we farm and just the science we have done means we're world leading. So we're not going to get the return. So I think they're thinking, hopefully this is like a silver bullet to getting that double production, but it could actually be the opposite and cost us more.
In the long term, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe you might have increased yields to start with if you want to go for big monocultures and just spray the shit out of it with glyphosate. Maybe you might have, but long term, you're going to destroy the soil. And probably your profits in the process.
And New Zealand largely trades on this clean and green imagery. The elephant in the room is that we aren't anywhere near that, and because we have such a wonderful climate here, and we've only been farming for 200 years, we haven't degraded our soils or our ecosystems to the extent of other countries, but we are doing it rapidly. We will catch up to those other countries that are already changing their practices and their ability to work with the ecosystems. That's the elephant in the room. We are extracting from our systems more than we need to be. And with just a few tweaks, we can actually improve our ecosystems, our local climate, and food quality, actually, and just our profitability in our farms. But for me, it's just short-sighted. Like, big problem here is that we have 3-year cycles with our politicians, and like, what's the first 6 months they're trying to figure out what the last lot did and where they can go, and then the last 6 months or a year are almost just trying to campaign to get back in. So there might be 18 months where they can try and get some stuff rushed through, provided there isn't some big event that takes preference. So I think that's a large driver. But yeah, if we had a vision as a country and we're all working towards it, it wouldn't matter who was in, because then hopefully the decisions they make in regulations would actually align with that. And that's where we largely are missing it. I see, just as a country, if we want to double our export money in, let's focus on the 40 million that we can feed, that can pay us more for it, and drive for that and lead and show the world what can happen. But also a real key part of that is, how do we, part of the conversation we're not having here alongside climate is the food insecurity within New Zealand. There's 1 million people here who struggle to get access to food, but we can feed 40 million. Surely we can have a system here that also looks after them, which then shows the world that we care about our own people and other people, and that's why we should also help tell our story. So that's an issue that is coming rapidly as well, because why would people want to buy our high quality food if we can't even feed our own people? And we've got really high, we're the third in the world for OECD when it comes to obesity. So we're not the picture of health.
Is it actually? I didn't know that stat. Really?
Yeah, it's crazy. And people come here from other countries and they say, oh, New Zealand's quite a fit place, but they're probably not going to the supermarkets, and you're seeing what people fill up their trolleys. And that's largely based to the cost of food, but also education around those decisions you make with your trolley now mean you don't have to pay the doctor later in life.
That's it.
So there's a lot of nuances in this whole conversation, but GE could be the dynamite that blows things apart.
Yeah, I agree, mate. And as you said earlier, this is like a crossroads now, where it's an irreversible experiment that we can't walk away from once it is done. So let's hope. And this is why we wanted to do this podcast, and thank you for coming today, because like the awareness needs to be like, we need to amplify voices like yours, because there's a lot of smart people out there that are just not being heard.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone needs a fair hearing. We'll get there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for all the work you're doing in the space. I've learned a few things from some of your videos online, which is, I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. That really backs up some of the stuff I've been reading. But yeah, just totally agree. We need to have a more open conversation, not just as farmers, but as a society in New Zealand, about what do we want this country to be, and how do we improve things so that we have better health. We have lower costs for the whole country, and that can be invested into other things, or even better health systems in the first place. So yeah, it's a big point in our journey as Kiwis, and hopefully we come to our senses and we split the bill at least, and then we can start working through that again.
Yeah, I agree. Keep it at medical uses aside. There's a wide range of applications for gene technology, and just because we're called GE Honesty doesn't mean we're anti-GE.
No.
There's one probably area I would support it is like in agriculture, is marker assisted breeding. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So it's basically just using gene technology to look what's in a plant and just say, oh, we like those desirable traits. We're not going to modify them, but we're going to take what we know and then use that for natural breeding. So it's just working in assistance with it to be more selective.
Absolutely.
I support.
It's like you just use the good things from everything, but you don't just take everything at face value and think it's going to be great. I didn't know that is actually quite a cool tool, and I don't know, like, that's what we should be definitely using, and that will get us in that natural breeding where we're wanting to go and get all the outcomes that we're trying to achieve with GE, and probably actually quicker, I would imagine. Yeah, it's a very interesting time in New Zealand at the moment. We've kind of shifted from climate, or climate's still forefront, but this GE one could slip through as a solution for that when it won't be.
Yeah, all right, mate. Well, I'm mindful of your time, so I'll let you finish up, but thanks, Conan.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me.